When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I don't know why I smiled. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the disbelief that someone I had welcomed into my home could turn against me so quickly. 10 years of loving my son, 10 years of making a home for our family, 10 years of caring for every small detail, gone in a few words. "Mom, you need to go," she said. Her voice was calm, almost polite. There was no anger. No scream. No hint of emotion. Just finality. I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just nodded and walked to my room. My hands were shaking. My mind was screaming, but my lips wouldn't move. I packed a small bag. My son was nowhere to be found. He had left for work, leaving me with her words ringing in my ears. I walked past her without a word. My heart felt heavy, like it had been replaced with lead. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I sat in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall, photos that now seemed like they belonged to someone else. I wondered where it all went wrong. How did a warm smile, a shared cup of tea, and laughter around the dinner table turn into cold instructions to leave? I thought about my son. How could he let this happen? How could he allow the woman he married to push me out of the house I had helped build? My chest ached with a mix of sadness and confusion. I didn't feel anger yet. I wasn't ready. All I felt was a quiet, deep hurt that seeped into my bones. I didn't know that this night, sitting alone in the living room, would mark the beginning of a journey I never imagined. A journey where I would learn truths I wasn't ready to face, betrayals I didn't expect, and a resilience I didn't know I had. Sometimes, when people look at a family, they think everything is perfect. They don't see the small cracks, the quiet tension, the little moments where trust begins to fray. That night, I began to notice those cracks. And I realized, painfully, that the woman who called herself my daughter-in-law was not the person I thought she was. Remember when she first came into our lives? She was young, bright, full of energy, and polite. My son had fallen in love with her during college, and I had been thrilled to welcome her into our family. I tried to treat her like a daughter from day one. I cooked her favorite meals, celebrated her birthdays, and made sure she felt at home. At first, everything was perfect. She would laugh with me in the kitchen while I cooked. She would help set the table. We shared stories late into the night, drinking tea, talking about family, dreams, and memories. My son and I would sit back and watch, thinking, this is how family should be. But over the years, small changes began to happen. She became more distant. She stopped sharing the little things. The smiles that once felt warm started to feel calculated. I noticed how she would roll her eyes at my advice or sigh quietly when I spoke. I told myself it was normal. People change. She had her own life now, her own routines, her own responsibilities. But deep down, I felt the first flicker of unease. Our family had always been close. My son was protective, kind, and caring. We had a rhythm, a way of living together that felt easy. Even when there were disagreements, we solved them. I thought our home was a safe place, a place where everyone's voice mattered, but I began to notice the small things she said behind my back. Comments about my cooking, my ways of managing the house, or even subtle criticisms of how I cared for my son. I brushed them off at first. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe I was reading too much into things. There were small arguments that never seemed like arguments. Conversations that started as jokes but left a lingering feeling of discomfort. I noticed how she would corner my son and whisper things. I would try to ask him about it, but he would shrug, say, "It's nothing, Mom." And I would nod, trusting him. I had always believed that family meant loyalty. That a woman who married into our family would see me as her own mother. But the seeds of betrayal had been planted quietly. And I didn't see them. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. How she would criticize me in front of guests subtly. How she would redirect conversations to make me feel small. How she would act like the house was hers and mine was secondary. But at the time, I thought I was imagining things. I loved her. I wanted her to be happy. I wanted my son to be happy. And I wanted the family to thrive. I didn't realize that my kindness, my patience, my warmth, could be taken as weakness. Then came the day when the tension became obvious to everyone. A small disagreement at the dinner table. A misplaced comment. A sigh too loud. And from that day, I started to feel a distance I couldn't bridge. She no longer smiled at me. She no longer sought my advice. The warmth was gone. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, maybe she's just stressed. But there was something else. A quiet coldness that grew, day by day, like frost spreading over a windowpane, and that is how it all built up to the moment when she told me to leave. It didn't happen in a big fight or a storm of words. It happened quietly, calmly, like a door closing gently, leaving me outside in the cold. After that first cold moment, when she told me to leave, life at home changed completely. It wasn't dramatic at first. There were no fights, no loud arguments. Instead, it was quiet, subtle, almost invisible, and that made it even harder to deal with. I began noticing small things that felt like tiny arrows to the heart. The way she would avoid looking at me when I entered the kitchen. The way she would move the chairs slightly when I walked into the living room, as if trying to make me feel like an outsider. Small actions, almost meaningless to anyone else, but to me, they carried weight. I tried to talk to my son about it, but he seemed to be caught between us. "Mom, she's just tired," he would say, rubbing his eyes. "Don't read too much into it." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust him, because he had always been fair, always been protective. But I also knew him well enough to see that he was avoiding the tension. 2.1 evening. I was cooking dinner, as I often did, and she came into the kitchen. I smiled, trying to start a conversation, asking about her day. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "I'm fine, Mom." That was it. No warmth. No invitation to talk. I felt a sting, but I tried to ignore it. Later that night, I found a note on the dining table. It was small, almost dismissive, written in her neat handwriting. "Please stay out of my way tonight." I held it in my hand, staring at it, feeling my chest tighten. I didn't say anything to my son. I couldn't. Words didn't feel like they would be enough. I just placed it back on the table and went to my room, trying to calm the tremble in my hands. Days passed like that. Each morning I woke up hoping it was a mistake, that she would smile at me again, that things would go back to how they were. But each evening, the silence grew heavier. The house, which had always been warm and full of laughter, now felt like a place I was visiting, not living in. Remember one afternoon in particular. I had been knitting in the living room, something I did to relax. She came in, carrying a stack of laundry, and paused. "Mom," she said, not even looking at me, "these clothes should have been washed last week." I swallowed hard. I had been busy that week helping my son with work and household errands. I wanted to respond, to say, "I know, I'll get to it," but her tone left no room for a normal conversation. I simply nodded and put my knitting down. I could feel my hands trembling again. I tried to hold on to small moments of peace. I would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the garden. I would water the flowers, talking softly to myself or humming a tune. But even in those moments, I felt her gaze. Not a glance of curiosity or concern, but a quiet, observing presence that made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. There were dinners where she refused to sit at the same table as me. My son would try to mediate, but it always felt like walking on a thin wire. One wrong move, and the tension would snap like a dry branch. I began to eat in my room sometimes, pretending to read a book, but my eyes kept flicking to the door, hoping she wouldn't notice, even the small routines I had loved. Setting the table, choosing flowers for the living room, arranging the pillows, became mine to do in silence. She would rearrange them, subtly, just enough to let me know she had control. I hated it, but I hated confrontation even more. I had always believed that family meant patience, love, understanding. And yet, here I was, slowly realizing that love alone was not enough. The breaking moments often came in small, quiet ways. One morning, I was preparing breakfast for my son. I had made his favorite pancakes. She came into the kitchen, glanced at them, and said, almost casually, "You never make them like you used to. Maybe you're getting old." I paused, spat out words I didn't feel like saying. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I didn't. I forced a smile and replied, "I'll try harder next time." Her eyes flicked past me. That was her way. She never confronted directly. She didn't have to. Every word, every gesture, was precise enough to cut. I could feel the weight of her silent judgment pressing down on me, and yet I could do nothing. I tried reaching out to my son again. I said, "She's hurting me. She's changing. This isn't right." He looked at me with tired eyes, rubbing his temples. "Mom. I love you, I do. But this is complicated. She's stressed, we all are. Please, just be patient." Patience. That was the word he used. Patience. And every time I heard it, I felt smaller. I started questioning myself. Was I overreacting? Was I imagining her cruelty? But deep inside, I knew it wasn't my imagination. The coldness, the dismissive words, the silent hostility, it was real. Then came the whispers. I overheard conversations that were meant to be private. One evening, I was passing by the living room when she said to my son, "Maybe it would be easier if she wasn't around so much. It's just stressful having her here all the time." I froze. I couldn't breathe. That sentence, so casual, so seemingly harmless, cut through my chest. I walked away quietly, my heart pounding. That night, I cried softly into my pillow, alone, wishing I could just disappear. I tried to keep my dignity. I didn't confront her directly. I didn't yell. I didn't slam doors. I kept my voice soft, my hands steady, my presence gentle. But the tension kept growing. It followed me everywhere, kitchen, living room, garden. I began noticing that even my son was changing. He was quieter, more distracted, and I could see the strain in his eyes. Every attempt to connect failed. I would suggest a movie night, a small outing, something simple. She would decline politely, always with an excuse. She stopped participating in family activities. She stopped sharing anything personal. Slowly, I became a stranger in my own home. I even tried writing little notes to her, small gestures of kindness. One day, I left a note on the dining table. "I made your favorite tea. I hope you enjoy it." She didn't reply. She didn't acknowledge it. She moved it aside like it didn't exist. The coldness was not just emotional, it became physical. She would rearrange my things. She would move my chair slightly when I wasn't looking. She would change the pillows, the flowers, the arrangement of the kitchen table. It was subtle, but it was deliberate. It was her way of asserting control, of letting me know I didn't belong. I began to withdraw. I stopped trying to reach out. I stopped asking questions. I stopped expecting warmth. I learned to navigate the house silently, almost like a ghost. I learned to avoid her gaze, to make my presence as quiet as possible, and yet, despite everything, I still loved her. I still wanted her to be happy. I still hoped that one day, we could find a way back to each other. But I was beginning to understand a painful truth: love alone cannot prevent betrayal. There were small incidents that made my heart ache, moments that replayed endlessly in my mind. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find her laughing with my son over something trivial. The laughter was light, easy, but there was a subtle shift in the way they looked at each other, a private understanding that I was excluded from. I sat quietly in the corner, pretending to read a book, while my heart broke silently. Then came the letters. She started leaving notes around the house, small messages, usually about chores or schedules, but always with a tone that was cold and calculated. "Don't forget to clean the windows," one read. "Please move the sofa before guests arrive," said another. Nothing warm, nothing kind, just instructions, commands, reminders that this was no longer a shared home, that I was merely an observer. I began counting the days. Days without warmth, days without acknowledgement. Days where I felt invisible. I tried speaking to my son, again and again, but his words were always the same: patience. And each time he said it, I felt the distance grow wider between us. Even my friends noticed. One came by for tea and commented softly, "You don't seem like yourself lately." I nodded, trying to smile. "It's nothing," I said, but inside, I was breaking. Then the rumors started. Quietly, I heard neighbors mention small things, conversations that suggested she was turning everyone against me. I felt isolated, trapped in a home that was once my sanctuary. Every glance from her, every subtle movement, felt like a reminder that I was no longer welcome, and yet, I stayed. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because I loved my son. I stayed because leaving would mean admitting defeat. I stayed, quietly, as the tension grew, knowing deep down that something had to give. Little did I know that what was coming next would shatter everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and love. What I thought was just coldness, subtle exclusion, was only the beginning of a betrayal I could never have imagined. A tea happened one quiet evening. The kind of evening where the sun is just dipping below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the living room. I had been in the kitchen, preparing tea, when I heard them talking in the living room. My son and my daughter-in-law. At first, it sounded ordinary, casual even. But then I caught a phrase that made my heart freeze. "I think it's time she leaves," she said. I dropped the tea towel from my hands. My fingers trembled. I leaned against the counter, holding my breath, hoping I had misheard. "Are you sure?" my son asked softly. "Yes," she replied, her voice calm, almost gentle. "It's better this way. For everyone." I felt a sharp ache in my chest, a cold, stabbing realization that this was not about a misunderstanding, or stress, or a temporary anger. This was deliberate. This was a plan. And it was about me. Remember standing there for what felt like hours, frozen, my mind racing. Should I confront them? Should I leave quietly? Or should I sit, wait, and listen to the rest of their conversation? I chose the last, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that I would hear something that would make sense. They continued, speaking softly, as if the walls themselves would betray them. They spoke about control, about the house, about decisions they wanted to make without my interference. My heart broke a little more with every word. This wasn't just exclusion. This was betrayal. This was a deliberate attempt to erase me from the home I had built with my son. Remember retreating to my room, clutching the cup of tea I had prepared. The liquid had gone cold. I didn't sip it. I just held it, trembling, as if holding on could somehow anchor me to reality. My mind spun with questions. How could my son let this happen? How could he allow her to speak this way about me? The man I had loved, raised, and nurtured, standing quietly, agreeing. That night, I tried to sleep, but my mind refused to rest. Every memory, every shared moment flashed before me. The birthdays we celebrated together, the late-night talks, the laughter over tea, the shared chores, the small comforts of family life. And now, it all felt like a fragile dream, dissolving in the cold reality of betrayal. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of foreboding. I felt a heaviness in my chest, a weight that would not lift. I went about my usual routine, but even simple tasks felt impossible. Preparing breakfast, setting the table, watering the plants. Every act reminded me that my place in this home was under threat. Later that day, my daughter-in-law came into the kitchen. She didn't greet me. She didn't smile. She simply said, "Mom, I need you to pack your things. You'll need to stay elsewhere for a while." I froze. My mind refused to register the words. Pack my things? Stay elsewhere? How could she say this? I tried to speak, to ask why, to understand, but the words wouldn't come out. My throat felt tight. My voice betrayed me. I don't understand, I managed to whisper. You will, she said softly, turning away. It's better for everyone this way. And just like that, my world shifted. The house that had always been warm and welcoming, the home I had built with care and love, suddenly felt alien. I packed my bag slowly, deliberately, as if moving carefully could slow the collapse of my life. Every fold of clothing, every item I touched, felt heavier than it had any right to be. I remember pausing to look around the living room. The couch where we had laughed together. The dining table where we had celebrated birthdays. The kitchen where I had shared countless cups of tea. All of it now seemed like someone else's space. I felt invisible, erased, and yet painfully aware of every step I took. I walked past her without a word. My son was there, watching, silent. He didn't intervene. He didn't say anything. And in that silence, I understood the full weight of what had happened. He was choosing her. He was letting her erase me from our family life. That night, I slept in my car. I parked on a quiet street under a broken streetlight. The world outside was dark, and yet inside, I felt a storm raging, quiet but unstoppable. I held my bag close, hugging it as if it could protect me from the betrayal I had endured. The next morning, a knock on my car window startled me. I looked up to see a man standing there, well-dressed, calm, and composed. He introduced himself, and the words he spoke froze me in place. I'm here because of your husband. There are matters you need to know about. I didn't understand at first. My mind was still spinning from the events of the previous day. I thought of my son. I thought of her. And yet, the man's presence felt like a lifeline, a thread connecting me to some truth I wasn't yet ready to face. He asked me to come inside a nearby cafe, and I did, almost mechanically. We sat at a small table, and he handed me a folder. Inside were documents I had never seen before, bank statements, property records, emails, even photographs. Each page, each detail, slowly revealed a story I could barely comprehend, explained that my son had been involved in activities I never imagined, hidden accounts, secret transactions, matters that could ruin everything if they were discovered. And then he said something that made me sit back and gasp. The house, it's legally yours. I felt a mix of relief and shock. Relief because the home I loved was still mine. Shock because the reality of the situation was more dangerous than I could have imagined. I wasn't being pushed out because I was unwanted or unloved. I was being protected from a threat I hadn't known existed, the man explained slowly, carefully. He needed my cooperation to help resolve the situation. He reassured me that everything I had experienced, the coldness, the hostility, the push to leave, was not personal. It had been strategic. My daughter-in-law had acted in ways I couldn't fully understand yet, and my son had been caught in a web of decisions, trying to navigate loyalty and safety. Remember sitting there, holding back tears, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, grief, understanding, and a quiet rage. Not at my son. He had been unaware of much. Not even at the daughter-in-law, fully. But at the reality of how easily trust could be manipulated, how fragile relationships could be when hidden truths existed. When I returned to the house with the investigator, the atmosphere had changed. I walked past the living room, past the familiar couch, the dining table, the kitchen, with a calm determination I hadn't known I possessed. My son and daughter-in-law were there, waiting, but I didn't look at them. I simply moved forward, ready to reclaim not just the house, but my sense of self. The confrontation was quiet. The investigator spoke first, professional, the calm. He laid out the facts, the evidence, and the consequences. My daughter-in-law's composure faltered, just slightly, and for the first time, I felt the balance shift. I had been invisible for too long. I was no longer just a figure in the background. I was present, aware, and strong. When it was over, my son looked at me, his eyes filled with regret and relief. He hadn't known how deep the situation had gone, and the realization hit him like a wave. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The house, the documents, the truth, it spoke louder than any words I could have used. That night, I slept in my bed again. But it wasn't the same as before. The bed felt larger, emptier, yet somehow comforting. I realized that safety and truth were more powerful than comfort alone. I had survived the betrayal. I had faced the coldness. And now, I had clarity. The turning point wasn't just the discovery of hidden truths. It wasn't just the confrontation or the quiet betrayal. It was the moment I understood the fragility of trust, the complexity of relationships, and the strength I had to summon to navigate them. For the first time in weeks, I felt a calm resolve. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply aware. I had seen the worst, and I had survived. I had learned that sometimes, those who betray you are not entirely villains, they are human, flawed, and capable of mistakes. And sometimes, the people you love are caught in ways you cannot see. It was the beginning of understanding. The moment when confusion gave way to clarity, hurt gave way to resolve, and fear gave way to cautious strength. It was the turning point, the quiet, emotional pivot from being a victim of betrayal to becoming a participant in reclaiming my life. From that day, nothing was the same. But for the first time in a long time, I felt grounded. I felt present. And I felt ready to face the aftermath, to navigate the emotional wreckage, and to find a path forward that honored not just the house or the family, but myself. After the confrontation with the investigator, life slowly began to change. But it wasn't immediate. The house felt different. The air seemed clearer, yet quieter. I could move through the rooms without the constant pressure of tension pressing down on me. The walls no longer felt like they were closing in, and the silence didn't sting as sharply. It was still quiet, yes, but there was space now, a space where I could breathe, reflect, and begin to understand. Spent the next few days sorting through my life. Not just the paperwork, the evidence, or the accounts, but the emotional debris that had accumulated over months of subtle exclusion and betrayal. I realized that for too long, I had allowed small acts of coldness to undermine my confidence, to make me doubt my place in the family, and even my own worth. One morning, I sat by the window in the living room, holding a cup of tea, and watched the sunlight filter through the curtains. The kitchen smelled faintly of the flowers I had placed the day before. I breathed deeply and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, calm. Not happiness, not joy, but a steady calm that suggested I could rebuild. My son began to approach me differently as well. He was quieter now, more reflective. He didn't speak about the betrayal openly, but his gestures, small things, like leaving a cup of tea on the table or asking if I wanted to join him for a walk, showed a tentative desire to repair what had been broken. I understood that he had been trapped in the middle, unsure how to confront the woman he loved while protecting the truth. As for my daughter-in-law, the tension remained, but it was no longer a cold, unseen force. She was careful around me now, measured in her words, but still distant. I realized something important. I didn't need her warmth to validate my existence or my place in the home. I was no longer defined by her approval or disapproval. That, in itself, was liberation. I took time to reflect on everything that had happened. I thought about the small, subtle moments. The notes, the rearranged chairs, the quiet instructions, and I realized that they had taught me something vital. That even when people act with intention to hurt, when the world seems unfair, and when betrayal comes quietly and steadily, it is possible to survive with grace. I started to engage more deliberately in my daily routines, not out of obligation, but out of choice. I cooked meals for my son and myself, enjoying the act itself rather than anticipating recognition. I tended to the garden, noticing the new buds, the way the sunlight hit each leaf. I cleaned the room slowly, appreciating the rhythm, the quiet, the sense of order that I could create. One afternoon, my son and I sat together in the living room, watching the rain streak across the window. He spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Mom," he said, "I know things have been difficult. And I should have done more. I'm sorry." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the genuine regret in his eyes. I reached out and took his hand. "It's okay," I said. "We've both been learning. And we'll keep learning. That's all we can do." I realized that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't erase what happened. It simply means choosing not to carry the hurt forward in a way that poisons the soul. I forgave my son for his silence, understanding that he was caught in a web he hadn't fully seen. I forgave my daughter-in-law, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Holding on to resentment would only prolong my pain. The house began to feel like home again, but in a different way. It was no longer just a place of shared memories. It was a place where I had claimed my presence, my voice, my right to exist without fear or quiet intimidation. The rooms echoed with the memory of laughter, but now they also echoed with my quiet confidence. I learned to appreciate the small victories. A simple smile exchanged with my son at breakfast. The satisfaction of a freshly swept floor. A quiet moment of reflection in the garden. These were reminders that life continues, even after betrayal, even after the subtle, painful erosion of trust. One evening, I found myself holding a letter. It was from my daughter-in-law, carefully folded, with neat handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. My first instinct was to ignore it, to leave it untouched. But curiosity, and perhaps a desire for closure, won. The letter was calm, polite, and measured. There was no apology, no explanation, no attempt to reconcile fully. It was merely a statement of her perspective, a brief acknowledgement that she understood the tension but felt her actions were necessary at the time. I read it slowly, and then I set it aside. I didn't need her words to feel validated. I didn't need her to recognize the hurt she had caused. I only needed to acknowledge that the past was over, and that the present and the future belonged to me. In the weeks that followed, life regained a rhythm. I reconnected with old friends, joined small community activities, and spent quiet evenings reflecting on the lessons learned. I found that my sense of self, my confidence, and my ability to navigate life were stronger than I had realized. The betrayal had not destroyed me, it had revealed the depth of my resilience. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit by the window, looking at the moonlight reflecting on the garden. I thought about what had happened, about the subtle, quiet cruelty I had endured, and about the clarity I had gained. I realized that life often presents challenges not to punish us, but to teach us. To show us where our strength lies, where our boundaries must be, and where forgiveness is necessary, not for others, but for ourselves. My son and I began having more honest conversations. We didn't speak about the betrayal constantly, but we spoke about our lives, our choices, our hopes. The bond between us grew stronger, not because the past was erased, but because the present was nurtured with understanding and care. Also began to notice small changes in my daughter-in-law, though not in a dramatic way. There was a subtle acknowledgement of boundaries, a recognition that I existed not as an obstacle, but as part of the family structure. I did not expect warmth or friendship, and I did not demand it. I only expected respect, and that was enough. I started journaling again, writing down my thoughts, my feelings, and my reflections. It became a way to process emotions, to understand the journey I had been through, and to ensure that I did not lose myself in the quiet chaos of betrayal. Each word, each sentence, became a step toward clarity, toward peace, and toward emotional freedom. Found that helping others brought me comfort as well. I began volunteering at a small community center, sharing my experience with older women who felt isolated or excluded. I discovered that by sharing my story, I not only helped them but also healed parts of myself. My pain was transformed into empathy, my hurt into understanding, and my betrayal into a lesson that could guide others. Sometimes, when I cook dinner or tend the garden, I reflect on how far I've come. I remember the fear, the uncertainty, the nights spent wondering if I still belonged anywhere. And then I look at the life I have now, a life where my voice matters, where my presence is recognized, and where I have learned that peace comes from within, not from the approval of others. Also realized the importance of boundaries. Trust is not blind, and love is not unconditional when it allows harm. I learned to say no, to step back, to protect my emotional space without guilt. These lessons were hard, painful, and humbling, but they were necessary. Over time, the tension in the house softened. Not completely, and not perfectly, but enough that I could exist without constant fear or anxiety. I could walk through the rooms and feel calm. I could speak my mind when necessary, knowing that my words carried weight and deserved respect. The relationships in my family became more honest. My son and I learned to communicate without fear. My daughter-in-law learned that subtle manipulation could not define my presence or my peace. And I learned that the quiet strength I had cultivated was more powerful than any anger, confrontation, or resentment. Life continued. There were good days and bad days, moments of laughter and quiet reflection, moments of challenge and moments of grace. But I faced each day with a sense of purpose and clarity that I had never felt before. The betrayal, though painful, had become a teacher. It had shown me my limits, my resilience, and my capacity for calm, heartfelt forgiveness. By the end of this period, I understood a truth that I carry with me to this day: life does not always go the way we hope. People we love can disappoint us. The home we build with care can feel alien. But strength is not measured by the absence of pain, it is measured by the courage to continue, to forgive, to reflect, and to reclaim the peace that is ours by right. In the quiet moments now, I often sit by the window and look at the garden I've tended for years. The flowers bloom, the sunlight dances on the leaves, and the wind whispers through the trees. Life has returned to a kind of peaceful rhythm. It is not perfect, but it is real, and it is mine. I have learned that betrayal, no matter how quiet or subtle, can be survived. I have learned that love does not always protect you from hurt, and that patience alone cannot prevent disappointment. But I have also learned that the human heart is resilient, and that clarity and calm can be found even in the darkest moments. Sometimes, I think back to the day she told me to leave. I remember the weight of her words, the way my son remained silent, and the ache that settled deep in my chest. And yet, I also remember the lessons that came after, the lessons that reshaped how I see myself, how I see family, and how I navigate life. I realized that peace is not found in the approval of others. It is not in the warmth of those who may choose to betray you. It is found within yourself. It is in the small acts of self-care, in the boundaries you set, and in the choices you make to honor your own heart. Forgiveness became part of my healing. Not because those who hurt me deserved it, but because I needed to release the weight of anger and resentment that could have trapped me forever. Forgiveness allowed me to reclaim my energy, my voice, and my presence in the home and in life. My relationship with my son grew stronger, deeper, and more honest. We learned to communicate without fear, to respect each other's boundaries, and to rebuild trust in a way that felt steady and authentic. The house, once a place of tension and exclusion, became a space of reflection and quiet strength. I could exist there without fear, without doubt, and without constant anxiety. And as for my daughter-in-law, I learned that I cannot control the actions or choices of others. What I can control is my response, my peace, and my boundaries. I am no longer defined by her words, her coldness, or her attempts to manipulate. I am defined by my strength, my empathy, and my capacity to survive and thrive. Sometimes, life will challenge you in ways you never expect. It will test your patience, your love, and your understanding. People you trust may disappoint you. Your home, your sanctuary, may feel like a battlefield. But in those moments, you discover your own resilience, your own quiet strength, and the profound power of calm, heartfelt reflection. Have learned to hold space for myself. To breathe. To notice the small moments of beauty, the sunlight on the table, the laughter of my son, the gentle sway of the garden. Life does not need to be perfect to be meaningful. And sometimes, the deepest lessons, the quietest strength, and the most lasting peace come from enduring what you never thought you could. As I sit here now, I feel a gentle warmth in my heart. I survived. I forgave. I reclaimed my life. And I know that no matter what comes next, I will face it with clarity, with patience, and with a quiet, unshakable strength that no betrayal can take away, because life, in all its beauty and all its pain, has a way of teaching us what really matters. And for me, what matters most is peace, self-respect, and the courage to keep going, no matter what. And in that quiet, reflective space, I finally understand, even when life turns against you, even when the people you love hurt you, it is always possible to stand again, and to do so with grace.